Welcome to Over the Target. If I look especially ebullient this morning, especially happy, it's because of the guest we have on, someone that I am dying to talk to. I know a lot of you want to know about the Ron DeSantis rollout, the announcement of his campaign. You want to talk about DeSantis versus Trump, what's happening. What are the polls showing? What's going to happen over the course of the next year? And really, there's no one better to talk to about this than our guest this morning, the great Rich Baris. Rich, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. This is really great. So let's start off with the most obvious. What are the numbers showing right now, focusing on Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis?
Lee, thanks for having me back. As always, it's great to be here. This is, in a nutshell, becoming a bit of a static now, which, in our polling, we've showed a commanding lead for the former president that really has developed over a period of 2 months. After the midterms, disappointing performance for Republicans. That was the closest we've ever showed that race. Ron DeSantis was a high of 31. And Trump was a low of 43. But, Lee, really, when you looked inside the numbers, which is why we call the show, what we do, when you look inside, it really still was a significant lead that is really built around the president's support with non-college voters for sure. But that is the base of the Republican Party. And they've always been the least undecided, The movement that we did see came from college-educated voters who gave Ron DeSantis a pretty good look for a while there, and then went back to Donald Trump. So that's really the state of this race. He is way not at 50%, folks. He is way above 50% at this point now, and it's going to be very difficult to stop him, if not impossible. There's just never been anybody polling this strong, even this early, who has not won the nomination. And the reason for that is simple. It's statistically significant. The majority has decided, and you have to change their mind. You have to, basically undecide them again. And that's a much more difficult task than trying to persuade someone.
I mean, look, we've seen the different instruments that the Biden administration has used to get people to undecide themselves, whether it was, whether it's appointing a special counsel to go after Donald Trump, whether it's the Mar-a-Lago raid, whatever it is. I mean, the Biden administration is clearly zeroing in on Trump like this. Is there anything that anything that you can foresee that would narrow the lead?
Because Alvin Bragg was the first one here, and I think it's pretty clear that they're looking at the numbers too, and they're thinking, we have nothing to lose by indicting him on these, even if they're ridiculous charges. The Republican voter is going, and at this point, it's getting to be the American public, period, is looking at what happened with Alvin Bragg, and they're saying to themselves, this is bogus. So anything that comes after this is just going to be shrugged off. It would have to be something serious, substantial, not something that most of the country is going to view to be fabricated or trumped up, and no pun intended. I just don't see it, Lee. I don't see it. I'm looking at the numbers every day, and I'm really thinking back to what the late Rush Limbaugh used to say, that there is nobody who's going to break this bond. No outside influence can break this bond. Only Trump himself can break it. And they were wise words.
All right. How did that lead get so big? Is it something DeSantis did, or did people just come back home and say, like, what am I thinking? DeSantis is great. He's a great governor. I owe the fact that my business is still running to Ron DeSantis, even though I don't live in Florida. He kept other Republican governors around the country on their toes. I love DeSantis, but frankly, Trump is the man. Or did DeSantis do something to alienate so many, or to push people into the Trump camp or back into the Trump camp?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little of both, Lee. It really is. There were some voters who gave him a hard look, and there are some out there who, even if they like the former president, they're thinking maybe it is time to move on. I want to win. And there was a question over whether or not Trump was the better candidate for that. the electability argument that DeSantis campaign tried to make, which is the one we heard from Mitt Romney, we heard it from Jeb Bush, we heard it from John McCain. They're over that. They don't believe it. They didn't believe it in 2016, and they're not going to believe it now. They think Donald Trump is the strongest candidate. He is the fighter. He won the Rust Belt when nobody else did. But really, there's an issue that I think it gets overlooked a lot, and it was not addressed in the announcement, which we heard from voters, and I'll tell you about that. But the first problem Ron DeSantis ran into was when Tucker Carlson asked the candidates for a statement about Ukraine. They were already very skeptical about where he came down on some of these issues. When he was in Congress, he most certainly supported these efforts in Eastern Europe. So they didn't know. As a governor, yeah, he's a great governor, but this is the presidency. Where is he on foreign policy? Where would he be on tariffs, on immigration, on some of these other issues? And the flip-flop, that was Lee, the flip-flop is what started his downward trajectory. And I think what happened is how he reacted to the indictment confirmed suspicions. And that was it. And they haven't come back since.
If you can explain the flip-flop, I think a lot of people have forgotten that. And then the response to the indictment, how this sent it on a downward trajectory.
Absolutely. Tucker had asked everybody who was either running or likely to run, what is your position on Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, the war in Eastern Europe with Russia? And he gave a response initially that is the response you have to give to win a Republican presidential nomination. This is a territorial dispute. This is not our problem. And then he heard from the donors, and then he got beat up on Fox News for 24 hours. And the establishment was mad, and he caved to them and revised what he said. And it was a very typical, I don't like using words like rhino, but it was a very typical traditional neocon wing of the party response that he revised it to. And he attempted to walk that back, but it was already too late. And then at that time, that raised eyebrows. By the time we get to the indictment, people are, their eyebrows up, and they're thinking, Trump is tested. I know what Trump is. I know he's not going to let us down. That's how they view this. He's not going to cave. He's not going to say one thing and do another. And then when the indictment came, whether they still supported Donald Trump or not, Republican voters, there were a lot of older voters, more moderate, who really didn't think that would happen, that was a lot of hot air. So when it happened, it shocked some of the electorate. And they expected everybody, no matter what you were doing, what your position is, you're going to run against the guy, everybody to circle the wagons. He took 72 hours to make a statement. And when he did, it was not only a very cookie cutter consultant crafted statement, but he took a shot at Trump in that statement. That was it. I'm telling you, Lee, for 35, 40% of the Republican Party, that was it. They're not coming back.
It's bizarre. Just to come back to the Ukraine statement again, what's bizarre isn't just the flip-flop, but that the donor class, that the war in Ukraine appears to be so important to them, right? I mean, you can understand defense contractors, but everyone who's lined up behind DeSantis, that's that important to him? Really strange. Look, there's a theory going on, and I think I know what you're going to say, but I want to hear it. There's a theory out there. I think it probably comes from Never Trump corners of that used to call themselves Republicans. I think that's not true anymore. I don't know what they call themselves, but there's a theory going on that they're indicting Trump. The Democrats are targeting Trump because that's who they want to run against. They want to run against Trump. They're really scared of DeSantis. And so that's why they keep pumping up Trump's numbers by trying to destroy him, by indicting him, by targeting him. What do you make of that theory? Where does it come from? And does it make any sense?
So that's actually, I view this as a branch of the electability argument that they have always done to either conservative or whatever it may be, an insurgent candidate that the establishment did not like. Listen, there is no evidence that Ron DeSantis would be a stronger general election candidate. Gubernatorial elections have exactly zero predictive value when it comes to a candidate's performance at the presidential level. If that was true, Mitt Romney would have been the golden candidate. He won the state of Massachusetts to be the governor, a very blue state. And then he went on to get pounded by Obama, not only in Massachusetts, but across the country. There's also this failure for some of these people to remember, there's no nice way to put it. Before Donald Trump came along, they were a party of losers. They barely lost or they barely won a re-election with an incumbent president all the way back to 2004. And they only did so because all of the political stars had aligned for them. And we're talking about a few thousand votes in the state of Iowa. That's what it all came down to. What Donald Trump did in 2016, which, by the way, is easier for him to do in 20, and I can get in 2024, excuse me. What he did in 2016 is so historic that it can't be brushed aside. He not only won Michigan and Pennsylvania, which wasn't done since 1988 for any Republican, but he won Wisconsin, which actually was not done since 1984, because even Herbert Walker Bush, who won with more than 400 electoral votes, lost the state of Wisconsin. He lost it to Michael Dukakis. So this idea that somehow he broke through the blue wall and then won the Rust Belt in 2016, it was a fluke, and he lost in 2020. They all got taken off guard in 2020. They didn't know what Democrats were doing. And because they've been bickering with arguments like that for the last several years, instead of addressing the real problem, they lost again in 22. And they're going to lose again in 24 if they don't get their act together. This is an infrastructure issue now.
You said something in there which I think would surprise a lot of, especially the people who are extremely pessimistic about where things are right now, right? Their opinion is, especially after the Arizona race, they're looking and they're saying, I don't get it. I don't see a path for Republican victory in a presidential election, not in 2024. Maybe not for a couple elections, maybe not for a generation. But you just said, maybe I'm misinterpreting it, you said, no, it's possible for Trump to do in 2024 what happened in 2016. Can you explain? And again, maybe I'm misreading it. I want to make sure I got it right.
Yeah, I can. We just had a census which of course impacts a lot: congressional representation, federal funding, and the Electoral College. And because blue states are losing population, Democrats will no longer start off with 240 electoral votes. Florida's gained population, the Sun Belt's gained population. Georgia is very important because of this, but also and again, this is not Republican only. This is Trump related. His strength in the Rust Belt, just had a new poll that came out, and others have basically backed this up. He is much stronger in the Rust Belt than generic or other named Republican candidates. So he no longer needs to win. He no longer needs to run the table. Pennsylvania, right? Or add Michigan. He just needs Wisconsin now, and to take back Arizona and Georgia. And word on how they did in 22 versus why it would be easier is everywhere we polled in 22, we also asked the rematch question. In Georgia, for instance, we would have Herschel Walker up by 1 point in the initial election. It was forced to a runoff, and he was down 5 points. But we had him up 1 point. And when we asked about Trump in that very same state, we had him up by 11. I mean, an unheard of margin. In Arizona, we did have Kerry Lake up, but we had Trump doing 6 points better. In Nevada, Adam Laxalt barely had a lead, and yet Trump was up by 6. So everywhere he was outperforming these Republican candidates anyway. Oz, same thing. We had 2 polls in Pennsylvania, one with Oz slightly ahead. The other one before that, Oz not slightly, he was down by 4. And yet Trump was up by 7 in the state of Pennsylvania. So he gets a vote that other Republicans, they can't get. It's not happening. I don't know how many more cycles we need to see, Lee, to acknowledge this is very obvious. And part of that is why he is polling so well in the primaries. He's got a bit of a secret weapon, this non-college, now non-white vote. And if they come out, his performance will be stronger than the polls even suggest.
This is fascinating. And again, really good news for many millions of Americans that a Joe Biden second term is not inevitable, that Donald Trump has a legitimate and very serious path to victory. Rich, we got to cut away for less than a minute. If you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, we're making the jump to Epoch TV exclusively. You don't want to miss a single second of our great conversation with the great pollster, Rich Baris, as I've got some other things that we need to clarify. More good news, I know, coming from Rich. Make sure you make the jump. We'll see you in less than a minute on Epoch TV exclusively. Is it possible for conservatives or Republicans to use mainstream media to the advantage of the country, to the advantage of American patriots?
There's only one view being represented in the media. The millennial generation, which has been more progressive and radical than ever, has been able to exercise a lot of influence on the media. And that's why you see one by one some of these old school liberals leaving for independent media and even conservative media.
What the woke generation is doing or what their goals are underneath.
Because they believe that they have a monopoly on truth. And if you dare to represent what a conservative or a Republican is saying, then you are willfully advancing lies. That's truly what they believe.